Okay, so this is going to be part two of our discussion for this week, and we are going to cover the reproductive system. With the reproductive system, we're actually covering two different things here, obviously, because we have the two different genders. So we're going to go over a little bit of the male reproductive system as well as the female reproductive system. When we look at reproduction, the overall goal of any reproductive system is to make sure that there is a generation past the current one. So it doesn't matter if we're talking about humans or if we're talking about any other particular type of animal. It is absolutely amazing the lengths that the body will go to or other organisms will go to in order to protect their offspring. And the reason for that is that generation, there is an ingrained innate understanding that that next generation is what is going to propel and keep a particular species going. And so that is one of the biggest goals for any particular species, is to make sure that that next generation is protected. And like I said, all organisms, but the human body as well, are going to do absolutely everything that they can to make sure that that next generation is the best possible group and specimens that they can be. So when we look at reproduction, it's actually going to start all the way back down to our gametes. And our gametes are just a term that we use to refer to the sex cells collectively. So if we're talking about both the egg cells and the sperm cells, we would refer to them as being gametes. Now, the interesting thing with the human gametes is that we are going to have the smallest cell in the human body represented, and we are going to have the largest cell in the human body represented. Now, going back to that theme, would be fitting that our final conversation goes back to that idea of nothing in the human body happens by chance. So when I tell you that we have the smallest cell and the largest cell involved here, there should be something that kind of sparks your imagination or your interest, that there's a reason behind that. And the reason is that you have the sperm cell, which are going to be introduced to the female body. And in order to make sure that the highest percentage possible for a pregnancy to result is going to be in place, you have to introduce a very large number of sperm cell into the female body. So to make sure that you can max out on the number of sperm cell introduced, they need to be incredibly small. On the other side of that, you have sperm cell that are introduced to the female body, and they, sorry, just checking to make sure that it's still going. The egg cell or the sperm cell that are trying to locate that egg cell, they have no idea where they're going. And because of how eggs are released in the female body, you only have an egg that is released from one ovary. So female body has two ovaries, but they take turns every other month. So 1 month, one ovary will release, and then the following month, the other ovary releases. So with fertilization of the egg, it actually happens in the fallopian tubes and or the oviducts, whatever you want to refer to them. They get like 5 different names. But because fertilization takes place within the fallopian tubes of the female body and not in the uterus, that means the sperm has to be introduced to the body, travel up through the uterus, and then they have to determine which fallopian tube they're going to go into, because they don't know which one holds the egg. So immediately 50% of the sperm that are introduced to the body are going to pick the wrong fallopian tube if they even get that far. So the percentage, like I said, drops off very quickly, just because half of them, at least half of them, are not even going to make it into the right fallopian tube. So to make sure that every possibility that those sperm are eventually going to find that egg, we make the egg very, very large, just to help the sperm out in being able to locate it. The other thing is the egg cell is the only cell that we have in the female body, or excuse me, that we have in the human body, that is visible to the naked eye. So if you had just one egg cell, you could actually put it on a tabletop and it is large enough you could see it with your eye, and no other cell in the human body has that capability. Now, from there, looking at cell division. We talked about cell division earlier on in the year. We went through mitosis, but mitosis involves your regular body cells. So anything that is not a gamete uses mitosis. Hair, skin, muscles, organs, all of that is going to go through the process of mitosis. But with the egg cell and the sperm cell, they can't use mitosis because in mitosis at the end, you have two cells that are identical. They are carbon copies to the parent cell, to the original. We can't have that in our reproductive cells because if you had identical cells to the or to the parent, that means that you would look exactly like your parents and your siblings would look exactly like you. So any sisters you have, if you are a female, you would look exactly like them. Guys, you would look exactly like your brothers or your dad. And we know that that's not the case. So cell division of the gametes has to happen in a different way so that we can ensure that doesn't take place. So in meiosis, which is the cell division of your sex cells, we have two major events that happen that are very different. Number one, we have something that is called crossing over. So during the process of cell division, your chromosomes will line up next to each other. And while they're lined up next to each other, it's kind of like if you've ever stood in line shoulder to shoulder with your classmates. But when the chromosomes do that, what they actually do is they will exchange pieces of genetic information between them. So part of one chromosome will break off and the neighboring chromosome will break off as well, and then they flip-flop spaces. And by doing that, they reform the chromosome and they alter the genetic information so they are no longer identical. The other thing that happens is in meiosis, the cells go through two cell divisions, and that is also a big change from mitosis. In mitosis, there's only one cell division. And the reason that we need that second cell division to happen in meiosis is because we have to take the chromosome number and we have to reduce it down. Now, a normal human cell is going to have 46 chromosomes, 23 pairs. And when we have our gametes, we know that the sperm cell and the egg cell are eventually going to fertilize each other. Well, if your sperm cell is carrying 46 chromosomes and your egg cell also has 46, at the point of fertilization, we now have 92 chromosomes, and that is way too much. So what happens through the process of meiosis is the cells go through that first cell division, and in the second cell division, we take that chromosome number and we divide it again so that we get down to half the number. So at the end of meiosis, a sperm cell is only carrying 23 chromosomes, an egg cell is only carrying 23 chromosomes. So now when fertilization happens, that 23 plus that 23 gets us back to our full 46. So meiosis is very important to our gametes because number one, it allows for the chromosomes to become genetically different through that process of crossing over, the exchange of genetic info between different chromosomes. And then we also get the chance for that second cell division so we can take that chromosome number and reduce it down to make sure at the point of fertilization we get back to the right number of chromosomes. Now at the end of meiosis, one of the other differences that we have is we now have 4 cells because with having 2 cell divisions, you start out with 1 cell, it divides and becomes 2. Those 2 cells now are going to be part of a second cell division, and so when those 2 cells divide, we get 4 cells at the end. In a male, those 4 cells are all viable sperm, meaning that any one of them could unite with an egg and cause fertilization. In a female, it's a little bit different. In a female, at the end of meiosis, you will have 4 cells, but only one of them is capable of becoming fertilized and being a pregnancy. So what happens is as the egg cells go through each cell division, you have one cell that is taking more of the cytoplasm, taking more of the material, and really creating this dominant superior cell to its counterparts. By doing that, we make sure that we have this one cell that is just kind of overloaded with all the good stuff so that if it would become fertilized, it has the best possible chance of flourishing and becoming a baby. The other 3 cells, because the cytoplasm, because the other material has been stolen from them as we work through the cell divisions, they could never result in a pregnancy. They are called polar bodies, and they will actually break down and dissolve and be just reabsorbed into the tissue. The next slide that you guys have is a visual that kind of shows you the crossing over. And in this particular case, you actually get to see the colors. If I print these off, they just are light gray and dark gray, and it's a little bit harder to distinguish. So you can see the red and the green, the two chromosomes that are next to each other. They will actually overlap and they will exchange their information. And you can see how in pair A, what they look like. And in mitosis, that's what they would look like at the end of mitosis as well. But with meiosis and that crossing over, now when you compare the pair or the two that you have in A compared to what you have in C, you can see how they're different. And so we have made sure that at the end of meiosis, we are not going to have a duplicate or be a carbon copy of our parents. Now, the next slide that you have talks about the male reproductive system, and I'm going to go ahead and talk through some of the major structures that we have here. And I put the two slides of the male reproductive and the female reproductive system side by side, and the reason for that is there are some things that I want you guys to kind of be able to compare with one another. So the first one is if you guys will find the location of the bladder in the male and the female body. In the female body, you will notice that the bladder is going to be housed right underneath the uterus. In the male body, obviously, we lack a uterus. And so if you look at what is above the bladder in the male body, you would have some intestinal tract there, but nothing really resting on top of it. So right off the bat, you can see why during pregnancy, when you have 8 pounds of baby in that uterus, and that is sitting right on top of the bladder, how that could potentially make frequent trips to the bathroom a very real possibility. So as baby grows and develops and becomes heavier, it's going to reduce the amount of space that the bladder would normally have to expand as it fills with fluid. And because that space is limited, the sensation to have to go to the bathroom is going to come much more often than it typically would. The other thing that I want you guys to take a quick look at, looking at those two pictures, is the urethra. So in both the male and the female body, we have the urethra. In the female body, it's going to be approximately 3 to 5 centimeters long, and I want to stress centimeters. So female body, 3 to 5 centimeters. In the male body, if you look at where the urethra is, if you find that on the picture, you are looking at somewhere between usually about 7 or 8 inches in length. So female body, we're measuring in centimeters. Male body, we're measuring in inches. With the difference between the two, this kind of goes back to actually little guys and when you're trying to potty train them. Because if you think about the distance, one of the things of potty training is that you build and develop that muscle control. It's just like a newborn, you support their head because their muscles are not developed to support their own head. Likewise, when you go into potty training, those muscles have to be developed to control and hold the urine where you want it in the bladder until you are ready or in a place to eliminate it or void it from the body. Because there is so much more urethra, it's going to involve more muscles to hold that urine in place. And so a lot of times you will hear people say to kind of wait on little guys, maybe not start them as early just because of that fact. Give them a little bit more time to let those muscles develop just because you have that difference between the male and the female body. Now, it's not 100% true. You'll hear stories of, little boys that potty train very early and little girls are a little bit later. Obviously, it's, not a perfect explanation, but if you have any issues or if you've potty trained little ones and you've noticed that there's a difference, that is one of the explanations behind that. So looking at the male reproductive system, we talked about the urinary bladder. Right underneath that, you have the pubic bone. And this is a bone structure that we have in both the male and female anatomy, just helped to support the reproductive structures and help maintain their location and where they're supposed to be. The ductus deferens or the vas deferens, This is actually a tube that you have within the male body, which is going to help transport sperm cells when they are on their way out of the body. With the urethra, we already discussed that. That is going to transport both semen as well as urine out of the male body, and that'll come into our conversation here in a little bit. With the corpus cavernosum and the corpus spongiosum, those are both layers of connective tissue that you have within the male penis, and that is going to work in combination with blood vessels, so that when those blood vessels take on a little bit more blood supply during stimulation, along with that connective tissue, it is what is going to help the penis become erect. Then you have the penis itself, and at the tip of the penis, you have both the glans penis as well as the prepuce, which are just those structures which are going to make the tip a little bit larger than the rest of, or the shaft of the penis. On the other side, it shows you the ureters. I like this view of the ureters a little bit better because it shows you that they actually come in more to the posterior side of the bladder than directly on top. Some of the pictures that we have, because they are from an anterior position or from a front view, kind of makes it look like the ureters come in right to the top of the bladder. This one gives you a little bit better vantage point. You have the large intestine, and you can see the position of that tucked kind of behind all of the reproductive structures. The next one that you have is the seminal duct or seminal vesicle. You also have the ejaculatory duct, as well as the prostate gland and the bulbourethral gland. Now, with those structures that I just identified, especially with the seminal vesicle, the prostate gland, and the bulbourethral gland, those are actually going to introduce fluids to the sperm as they are leaving the body. So the sperm cells are actually going to mature within the testes. Once they mature and the male body becomes stimulated, they will start their journey out of the body. And so they make their way into a tube-like structure, which is known as the epididymis. So mature in the testes. They will stay in the testes until they are going to leave the male body, and they will stay there for up to 60 days. After 60 days, if they have not left the male body, they will actually break down and be reabsorbed back into the surrounding tissue. But if they do leave the body, they will make their way from the testes into the epididymis. From the epididymis, they will continue through that tube track into the vas deferens. Vas deferens, you can see how that loops around and eventually links up with that seminal vesicle. The seminal vesicle is going to start introducing a series of fluids. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to reduce the acidity of the sperm. Now, one of the things we associate with sperm is they have a long tail, and that tail will actually flip back and forth in a whip-like action, allowing the sperm to swim. But while they're housed in the body, the male body, there's no reason for them to carry out that action. It would burn up energy that they don't need to use. They don't need to start swimming until they're introduced to the female body. So by keeping them in an acidic state, they are kept dormant and they will not whip that tail back and forth. As they pass through, the seminal vesicle is going to put in a fluid that will start to reduce the acidity of the sperm and interject fluids that will help them once they are introduced to the female body. From the prostate gland, if you look at how this is positioned, it is wrapped around the urethra. Now, the prostate gland is like other structures that we have in the human body in that it never stops growing. So it will continue to grow throughout the male's life. And for that reason, later on in life, it is not uncommon for males to have prostate issues because as it continues to grow, sometimes it grows and pinches that urethra. And because this carries both urine as well as sperm cell out of the body, if that starts pinching off the urethra, it can make the passage of those materials very difficult. So the sperm are going to continue on their way out of the body until they get mixed with all of the fluids. They don't make it to that semen status. So when they're in the epididymis, when they're in the vas deferens, they still would simply be sperm cell. With the seminal vesicle, you get the first introduction of a fluid that will help the process. Prostate gland will add a little bit as well, and then we get into the bulbourethral gland. And the bulbourethral gland is going to help uh, offer a lubrication, and so it will coat the inside of the penis, and then it will actually move out. It's a clear fluid to the tip of the penis as well, so that if it is introduced to the female body, it can help that process, so that the penis can be introduced and not cause any pain or other issues. Now, the combination of all of those fluids that come from the seminal vesicle, as well as the prostate gland and the bulbourethral gland, are all going to combine together. That is going to create semen, which can then be transitioned into the female body. The other thing that it will do is, because the urethra is going to transport urine out of the body, urine will actually kill sperm. So part of the fluid that is going to be introduced from those three structures that I just mentioned will also make the conditions inside the urethra, put them at a level where it's not going to kill off the sperm. So any urine that might be left behind, it will neutralize that urine and make sure that it doesn't do any damage to the sperm cells as they're leaving. Last one that I haven't talked about is the scrotum. The scrotum is a pouch that we have outside of the male body, and it is going to house the testes. Testes will actually not be at the same level with each other, and that is just for comfort. So if you notice that, especially if you have a little baby boy, that is perfectly normal for them to be offset from each other slightly. And with the scrotum, the reason that we need the testes to be outside of the body is that because temperature control for the sperm is very important. At our normal body temperature, that is too warm for sperm. They would not mature or form correctly, and the possibility of pregnancy would be greatly reduced. So by having them in the scrotum, it allows for the temperature to be a couple degrees cooler, and that is much more optimal for those sperm cells. Now, again, if you have a little guy, one of the first things they will do at birth is they will make sure that the testes have fully descended. During baby formation, the testes actually start on point with the kidneys. So if you think of where your kidneys are, mid to lower back, that's where the testes start out. And the closer you get to birth, those testes will migrate down and move away from the kidneys and make their way into the scrotum. Sometimes that doesn't happen. And so doctors will check that very early on to make sure that they have moved where they're supposed to and that everything is correct. Now, looking at the female anatomy, um, starting on the left-hand side, looking at the uterine tubes. And like I said, you get uterine tubes, oviducts, fallopian tubes, all sorts of names for these. Whichever one you are more comfortable with, that is perfectly fine. Now, with the uterine tube, it is very closely positioned to the ovary. So you would have two ovaries and two uterine tubes. With that, one of the things, and again, picturing, it's very hard to show this. The ovary and the uterine tube are not connected. And in most pictures, they will make it appear like they are joined or united. They are not. And so there is a potential that an egg would be released from an ovary and never make it into the uterine tube. And if that happens, again, it floats away. It would basically die and get reabsorbed. Wouldn't cause any big issues, but it has been known to happen where it does not make it into the uterine tube. So the ovary is going to be the structure that releases the egg. And as I mentioned earlier, you alternate back and forth. So 1 month, the right ovary would release an egg. The following month, it would be the left ovary. Women can actually have different symptoms if they have bloating or cramps or anything like that associated with their monthly cycle. They might notice that from 1 month to the next, it's different. And that's because depending on what ovary is releasing the egg can also determine how severe the symptoms and other things associated with that cycle are. So if you've noticed that, that's part of the reason why. You have the uterus, and obviously when the uterus is not housing a baby, you can see the positioning and what it looks like. Sitting right on top of the urinary bladder. Again, we get another view of the symphysis pubis, which is going to be that bone that will help support these reproductive structures, since we don't have a lot of bone structure through the abdomen area. We already identified the urethra, compared that between the male and the female body. From there, you get into the clitoris. And the clitoris is going to be a location in the female body where you have a cluster of nerves. And the number of nerves that you have in there is much higher than any bundling of nerves that you have in pretty much any other place of the body. When that bundle of nerves becomes stimulated, it will actually cause blood flow to that particular location to be increased, and it will become engorged. In a lot of places, they actually compare the clitoris of the female to be the equivalent of the penis in the male because both of them are going to take on higher levels of blood flow. Both of them have a heightened number of nerve cells. And so we see kind of some of the same changes happening within the male and the female anatomy when that stimulation is present. Then we have the labia, and you have the minus and the majus, or minor and major labia within the female body. The difference between the two is going to be their skin folds that you have within the female anatomy. Number one, they are there to help hold in moisture, and then they are also there to kind of create a block and prevent bacteria and other things from easily being able to enter the female anatomy since you do have openings within this particular area. The minus are going to be smaller, and so they do not have any hair. And with the major, the larger skin folds, they are, like I said, larger in size, and they would have hair on them. Then you have the vaginal orifice. So that is going to be the beginning of the vagina. And if we switch over to the right-hand side, you have the fimbriae. Fimbriae are tiny little extensions that you have at the end of the uterine tube. And what they do is they actually have a wave-like action. So they kind of float and they draw that egg. So once the egg is released from the ovary, even though it's not a connection, fixed connection between the ovary and the uterine tube, that wave-like action from the fimbriae helps to draw the egg into the uterine tube. The rectouterine pouch is just simply a space that's created between the uterus and the large intestine. You have the cervix, and with the cervix, that is going to be the bottom 1/3 of the uterus. So if you look at where that little pointer is going, you can see it's the very bottom edge of that uterus, and that is the location, or that is the point that we refer to as being the cervix. You also can see the rectum. It shows you the anus and the vagina, which is your birth canal. You can imagine going through labor, babies passing through that birth canal. One of the things that they are going to keep track of post labor is what's going on with that large intestine. And so they will listen for sounds. It's not uncommon for them after labor to offer or prescribe a stool softener. And they will make sure that the bowels start moving again. Because of baby passing through that area, it's a lot of trauma and it disrupts the functioning of everything around it, not just the uterus. And so doctors will make sure that everything is up and running prior to releasing mom from the hospital. Now, one last thing with the uterine tube, I mentioned that fertilization happens within the uterine tube. And a couple of things with that. The reason that they believe fertilization takes place in the uterine tube is because sometimes when mom becomes pregnant, she's not expecting to become pregnant. And so if fertilization happened in the uterus, the egg would immediately implant into the uterus. And as soon as that implantation happened and that connection between baby and mom is established, baby is now drawing from mom's blood supply and would be dependent on mom. If mom's not trying to get pregnant and she doesn't know she's pregnant, she might be potentially putting things into her system that would harm and damage the child. So by having fertilization take place in the uterine tube, it can take anywhere from 7 to 10 days for that fertilized egg to travel from the uterine tube into the uterus and actually implant and become dependent on mom. It closes the window between when fertilization actually happens and between when baby is dependent on mom and when that missed period is going to happen. So that, like I said, if mom wasn't trying to get pregnant, She's not engaging in things that could be potentially harmful for her baby. Once that implantation does happen, the other thing to remember is that mom's blood never crosses over into baby. Baby will get oxygen, nutrients, and things like that from mom through the placenta and the umbilical cord, but mom's blood never actually goes into the baby. If for some reason after fertilization, the baby does not travel down and implant in the uterus but stays in the fallopian tube, that would be an ectopic pregnancy. So if you've heard of ectopic pregnancies, that's what they're telling you, is that fertilization occurred, but baby decided to stay in the uterine tube and implant there. And at the beginning, everything will seem to be going well. Pregnancy hormone will be given off, positive pregnancy tests. But once baby grows to the point where they have taken up that room in the uterine tube, you can have a lot of problems associated with that. All right, so that takes care of our reproductive information. When you guys get into the Tesmos, make sure that you guys have your muscle sheets with you as well. And just one quick thing, I want to take a second to thank you guys for your work through this process. I know it's not what you guys were anticipating, having all of your classes go fully online. In a lab-based class, it's very hard to do things in this way, but you guys have been very good about keeping up with your assignments and keeping in communication with me, letting me know if there was problems, questions, issues, and I appreciate that very much, more than you guys will know. So I'm sorry that the semester went the way that it did. I wish you guys all the best, and I just wanted to take a moment, like I said, to thank you guys for being as willing as you were to work through it under the conditions that we had to. So I wish you all the best in the future. In the upcoming week, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me, and I will talk to you guys later.